All right, so get ready, because today we're diving deep, really deep, into medieval theories of properties of terms.
Yeah, this is gonna be fun.
It
It's
is.
one of those topics that sounds incredibly dense,
Yeah.
but and it is, but it's also surprisingly relevant
Right.
to modern philosophical discussions.
Absolutely. And we're going to be looking specifically at excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on the subject.
Right, and I think what's going to be really fascinating for you as a philosopher is just how much these medieval thinkers were grappling with questions that, we still ponder today.
Yeah.
Like, how do words connect to the world?
Right.
How do we avoid logical fallacies? How can we use language effectively to understand ourselves and the universe? All that good stuff.
It's like we're time traveling
Yeah.
back to the Middle Ages
Yeah,
to talk to these philosophers
absolutely. Yeah.
about like just the nuts and bolts of language.
And their approach was anything but simple, right?
Yeah.
They weren't just interested in grammar. They were building a whole system to analyze the logic that underpins communication.
So it wasn't just how to construct a sentence,
Right.
but how to understand like the building blocks of meaning.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And they believed that by understanding these properties of terms,
Okay.
they could unravel all sorts of philosophical mysteries.
Right.
Like, they saw this as key to identifying logical fallacies,
Okay.
clarifying the nuances of meaning,
Yeah.
even making progress on, debates about the nature of reality itself.
That's a lot to put on words.
It is.
Yeah, it's like they created like this philosophical toolkit
Yeah.
to like dissect language and see how it works.
That's a great way to put
Yeah.
it. They were meticulous
Yeah.
about categorizing and analyzing different aspects of language.
So where do we begin?
Well, the big picture is this, right?
Okay.
Medieval philosophers were intensely interested in the relationship between words, thoughts, and things.
Okay.
How those three connect.
Because we use words to express our thoughts and talk about the world.
Exactly. So there must be some kind of connection, right?
Right.
And to analyze these connections, they developed this really sophisticated system
Right.
that focused on the properties of terms.
Properties of terms.
Yeah, think of these properties as lenses through which we can examine how words function in sentences
Okay.
and how they contribute to meaning.
Okay, so what were some of the like key properties?
Okay, so two of the most fundamental distinctions that they made were between signification
Okay.
and supposition.
Okay.
Huge, huge concepts, right?
Right.
So let's start with signification.
Okay.
Think of signification as the core meaning of a term,
Okay.
what it stands for in a general sense.
Okay.
So, like, the concept a word represents, regardless of how it's used in a sentence.
So like tree would be the general idea of a tree.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right, encompassing all the characteristics that
Yeah.
we associate with trees.
Okay.
But here's where it gets interesting. They debated intensely about whether words signified mental concepts or things in the world.
Oh.
Like, did the word tree refer to my idea of a tree
Oh, right.
or to trees themselves?
Like the problem of universals?
Absolutely. Huge debate.
Yeah.
Figures like Aristotle
Oh, wow.
and Augustine weighed in on this,
Okay.
sparking like centuries of discussion.
Wow, so what'd they think?
Well, Aristotle leaned towards words signifying mental concepts.
Okay.
Well, Augustine argued that words ultimately signify things in the world,
Okay.
with concepts acting as a kind of bridge.
Okay, so the word points to the concept and then the
Yes.
concept points to the thing.
Precisely.
Oh, okay.
And in the 13th century, philosophers took it even further,
Okay.
suggesting that the concept itself could be seen as a kind of sign.
Oh, wow, so many layers.
Right, so it gets really complex.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting.
Okay, so we talked about signification. What about supposition?
Okay, so supposition
Yeah.
is all about how a term is actually used. Okay.
In a specific sentence. So
Uh-huh.
what it refers to in that particular context.
Okay.
Think of it as the role a word plays in a sentence,
Okay.
which can vary depending on the surrounding words and the overall meaning.
So while tree might signify the concept of a tree in general,
Yeah,
its supposition changes depending on the sentence it's in.
you got it.
Okay.
So for instance,
Yeah.
in the sentence, the tree is swaying in the wind.
Okay.
The word tree supposits for a particular individual tree
Right.
that's currently swaying.
Yeah. Okay.
But in the sentence, a tree is a plant.
Okay.
The word tree supposits for the universal concept of, treeness encompassing all trees.
So the same word, different roles depending on the sentence.
Exactly. It's like an actor playing different characters.
Oh, that's a good way to think about it.
Right. And medieval logicians were meticulous in identifying these different modes of supposition.
Okay, so what were some of those modes?
Well, they distinguish between material supposition.
Simple supposition
Okay.
and personal supposition.
Okay, so material supposition, what's that?
Material supposition is when a word refers to itself as a linguistic item,
Okay.
as a word,
Okay.
rather than to its usual meaning.
So like tree is a four-letter word.
Precisely.
Okay.
The word is kind of stepping outside of its usual role
Gotcha.
and calling attention to its form.
Okay, what about simple supposition?
Simple supposition
Yeah.
is when a word refers to the universal concept or form it signifies.
So like the tree is a symbol of life,
Exactly.
right?
It's about the abstract idea
Gotcha.
of a tree rather than any specific tree.
Okay, and then personal supposition.
Personal supposition is when a word refers to individual things,
Okay.
particular instances of the concept.
Okay, so the tree is swaying in the wind.
Exactly.
That would be personal.
You got it.
Okay.
It's about picking out a particular tree
Okay.
from the set of all possible trees,
Right.
and just to make it more complex.
Of course.
Yeah.
Medieval logicians went even deeper
Okay.
and further divided personal supposition into categories like determinate,
Okay.
confused and distributive,
Okay.
and merely confused.
Wow, this is already a lot.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in,
Very intricate.
but it's really cool.
Yeah, I'm seeing how nuanced this is.
And we've only just begun.
Oh, boy.
Their attention to detail
Yeah.
and their commitment to rigorous analysis are remarkable.
All right. Well, I'm ready for more.
Okay, so next, we're going to delve even deeper
Okay.
into those fascinating subcategories of personal supposition
Yeah.
and see how they tackled even more intricate linguistic puzzles.
This is a fun journey back in time
It is.
to figure out what they were thinking.
Yeah, these medieval minds were amazing.
All right. Well, I can't wait to see what other insights they have in store for us.
Let's do it. Okay, so, we were talking about those subcategories of personal supposition
Yeah.
and how those work.
Right. And medieval logicians were really, they were particularly interested in
Yeah.
how the properties of the subject and predicate
Okay.
in a sentence could influence each other's supposition.
Okay.
They saw it as a kind of like a dance,
Yeah, okay.
where each partner's moves affected the other.
So, like, give me an example of that, how that would work.
Sure, sure. So they had this phrase for it,
Okay.
and it's in Latin,
Okay.
talia subiecta pudicata permiserent.
I think I vaguely remember that from, like, my medieval philosophy class.
Right, exactly.
But, like, what does that mean?
Well, it means basically subjects are such as predicates permit.
Okay.
It means that the predicate of a sentence sets limitations on the kind of subject that can accompany it.
Okay.
So, for example,
Yeah.
if your predicate is a virtue,
Okay.
your subject has to be something that can be a virtue,
Okay.
like, justice, courage, whatever.
Yeah.
You couldn't say, like, a tree is a virtue
Right, right.
because a tree can't have that quality.
It's like a key fitting into a specific lock.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this interplay between the subject and predicate,
Yeah.
it's crucial for understanding how medieval logicians approach these more complex sentences
Yeah.
and arguments, really.
Okay.
And they also went into this really fascinating idea
Yeah.
of ampliation and restriction.
Okay, what is that?
So these are cases where certain words could actually broaden or narrow the supposition of other terms in a sentence.
So, like, give me an example of that. How does that work?
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
So let's start with ampliation,
Okay.
which basically means broadening.
Okay.
So think about how, like, past tense verbs
Okay.
can expand the temporal scope of a subject.
Okay, so, like, philosophers have pondered the meaning of life for centuries.
Yeah, exactly. So the verb have pondered
Yeah.
is ampliating the subject philosophers
Okay.
to include all philosophers throughout history.
Right, even the ones that aren't around anymore.
Exactly. So it allows the subject to encompass a wider range of instances
Okay.
across time in this case.
Okay.
And similarly, modal verbs like can or might,
Right.
they ampliate the supposition to include possible things.
So a perfect philosophical system might one day be discovered.
Exactly.
That would be ampliation.
Exactly. It's talking about a potential system,
Okay.
not one that necessarily exists.
Right.
Okay. Restriction
Yeah.
does the opposite.
Yeah.
It limits the supposition.
Okay.
So adjectives are a classic example of restrictors.
Okay.
So for instance, some philosophers are skeptical.
Okay.
The adjective skeptical restricts the supposition of philosophers to only those who adhere to skepticism.
Right. So not all philosophy.
Exactly, yeah.
Just a certain set.
Precisely. It's like adding a filter that narrows down the possibilities.
Okay.
But were medieval philosophers always in agreement about ampliation and restriction? No.
Right. Because there's a lot of room for debate, I would imagine.
Of course, right. One of the most interesting challenges
Yeah.
to the traditional understanding of ampliation
Okay.
came from William of Ockham.
Occam. Okay.
Yeah, you know Occam.
Occam's razor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, a 14th century philosopher
Right.
known for his razor-sharp thinking
Yeah.
and his nominalist views.
Okay. So how did he challenge ampliation?
So, Occam argued that certain sentences
Okay.
that were traditionally analyzed as cases of ampliation
Okay.
were actually ambiguous.
Okay.
And he pointed to sentences like,
Okay.
a white thing was black.
Okay. Yeah. I can see how that would be ambiguous.
Right, how do you even interpret that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So typically medieval logicians
Uh-huh.
would say that the past tense verb was
Okay.
ampliates the supposition of white thing
Okay.
to include things that were white in the past but might not be white now.
Right. Okay.
So the sentence could be true if it's referring to something that changed color.
Okay. So what was Occam's alternative?
He argued that the sentence actually has two possible interpretations,
Okay.
and that ampliation alone couldn't capture this.
Okay.
So it could mean that something that is currently white was black in the past,
Okay.
or that something that was black in the past is currently white.
Right. Okay.
Two distinct claims
Yeah.
with potentially different truth values.
So he's saying instead of just broadening white thing to the past,
Yes.
it could be either or.
Right. It could be read in two different ways.
Okay.
So he rejected the idea that ampliation could neatly handle all the subtleties
Okay.
of temporal reference.
Right.
And what's fascinating is that this debate about ampliation
Yeah.
has echoes in contemporary philosophy of language.
Oh, wow.
Even today, philosophers are still grappling with how to best account
Okay.
for the complexities of temporal reference.
Oh, so we're still dealing with this like centuries later.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a
Yeah.
really fundamental issue.
Right. So even though this was in the 14th century,
Yeah.
still relevant today.
It's amazing how these medieval thinkers
Yeah.
were wrestling with issues that are still relevant.
It's a testament to like how much they were really thinking about this.
Absolutely. Their deep engagement with language, it's
Yeah.
really remarkable.
So we've talked about signification,
Yeah.
supposition, ampliation,
Mhm.
restriction.
Yeah.
Are there any other significant properties of terms?
Yes, there is another one called
course.
appellation.
Okay.
And it had a somewhat fluid meaning throughout the Middle Ages,
Okay.
but it ultimately became key to analyzing how predicates relate to the things that they're predicated of.
Okay. Can you give me like a concrete example?
Sure.
Yeah.
So one of the key ideas connected to appellation
Okay.
is that a predicate should be truly predicable
Okay.
of the subject's supposita.
Okay. Break that down for me.
Yeah, so basically, what a predicate asserts about a subject
Yeah.
should actually hold true
Oh.
for the specific things the subject refers to. So if I were to say, like, all logic textbooks are boring,
Right.
the predicate boring should actually apply to all the individual books
Right.
that fall under the supposition of logic textbooks.
Okay. Gotcha.
But appellation was also used to explain why certain sentences couldn't be simply reversed
Okay.
or converted without changing their meaning or truth value.
Give me an example of that.
Yeah, so consider the sentence, the just will be justly condemned.
Okay. That's like a paradox.
Yeah, it sounds paradoxical, right?
Right.
So the original sentence could be true if we interpret it as saying that those who are currently just
Yeah.
will commit sins in the future
Okay.
and therefore be justly condemned.
Okay. So how does appellation play into that?
Well, if we try to reverse it and say justly will to just be condemned,
Okay.
it becomes false.
Oh, that.
Because in the reverse sentence, the predicate justly condemned
Okay.
is applied to the subject, the just, in the present tense.
Right.
But this contradicts the idea that they're currently just, because being justly condemned implies they've already done something wrong.
Ah, so it has to do with the timing of it.
Exactly, yeah. The temporal dimension comes into play.
Right.
Appellation helps highlight how the arrangement and tense of words
Okay.
in a sentence can significantly impact
Okay.
what is being said about whom and when,
Gotcha.
right? Medieval logicians were really attentive
Yeah.
to these nuances
Okay.
and how they can affect truth and validity.
So with appellation, the main takeaway is
The main takeaway is that appellation underscores the role of time and context
Okay.
in determining how a predicate relates to its subject.
Okay.
It reminds us that the truth of a sentence can depend on when and how a predicate is applied
Okay.
to the things referred to by the subject.
Okay, that makes sense.
So we've looked at signification, supposition, ampliation, restriction,
Yeah.
appellation.
Yep.
Are there any other essential pieces of this medieval puzzle?
Yeah, I feel like we've gone through a lot.
I know, right?
But is there more?
Yes, there's one more
Okay.
critical component, and
Yeah.
that's relation,
Okay.
also known as the supposition of relatives.
Okay.
So this property deals with how words like pronouns connect back to the terms they refer to, their antecedents.
Okay.
So it's all about the logic of what we call anaphoric reference.
So like when she refers back to, Hypatia or something like that.
You got it.
Okay.
And medieval logicians were particularly fascinated
Okay.
by how the supposition of these relatives could shift depending on the context,
Oh,
and
but
how
yeah.
this could lead to all sorts of logical puzzles.
Okay, well, give me a puzzle.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
So consider the sentence, every philosopher questions their own beliefs.
Okay.
So the pronoun there refers back to every philosopher.
Right, right.
It's indicating that each philosopher, engages in self-reflection.
Yeah.
But here's the puzzle.
Okay.
Even though there seems to have the same supposition, as every philosopher, you can't just swap them
Okay.
and keep the same meaning.
No.
So the sentence, every philosopher questions every philosopher's beliefs,
Okay.
is quite different.
Right, it's a different meaning.
Yeah, so how do we explain that?
Yeah.
Well, they argued that while there refers back to every philosopher,
Okay.
it doesn't refer in the same way
That's what I
as the original noun phrase.
Right.
So the pronouns supposits for each philosopher individually, not collectively.
So each one has their own beliefs.
Right, exactly.
That they're questioning, not, a universal set of beliefs.
Exactly. Yeah, it's sensitive to individual instances,
Gotcha.
even when the antecedent refers to a group.
Okay.
And they developed specific rules to govern how these relatives could be replaced
Okay.
without altering the meaning.
It's fascinating how even pronouns can get so complex.
I know, right?
Yeah.
And this attention to detail,
Yeah.
this willingness to break down language is what makes the medieval theory of properties of terms so remarkable.
I have to say, this has been so illuminating.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yeah, I feel like I have a much better understanding of medieval philosophy of language.
And, we've only scratched the surface.
Of course, right?
There's so much more to explore.
Yeah.
Different schools of thought, debates
Right.
about the nature of signification, supposition,
Okay.
all sorts of fascinating things.
But for our purposes, we've gone through a lot today.
We have.
So why don't we give our listeners a chance to process this?
Sure, yeah, take a moment.
Yeah, take a moment to think about all this, because there's a lot to unpack.
Absolutely, it's a lot to take in.
Yeah. But it's definitely worth pondering.
It is, yeah, these concepts are really fascinating.
So we'll be back
Yes,
to wrap everything up.
sounds good.
Okay. So as we wrap up this deep dive into medieval properties of terms, is there like a final thought you can leave our listeners with? Something that really captures why this all matters, especially for a philosopher today?
I think it's worth reflecting on just how seriously these medieval thinkers took the power of language.
Mhm.
They recognized that language isn't just a tool for communication.
Yeah.
It's a tool for thinking,
Right.
for reasoning, constructing arguments, and ultimately understanding the world.
And also how it can be misused,
Bro,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why they developed such a meticulous system to analyze it.
Right.
Right. They wanted to make sure they were using language precisely
Yeah.
to expose those hidden ambiguities.
Right. Because it can be very easily manipulated.
Exactly. And to build a solid foundation for philosophical inquiry.
So it's not just about winning a debate.
No, not at all.
It's about understanding the responsibility we have as users of language.
Precisely. And that's a lesson that's more relevant today than ever, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, we're bombarded with information,
Yes,
most of
right.
it through language.
Right.
So we need to be aware of the nuances, the
Yeah.
ways it can be used and misused.
It's like they gave us this toolkit for dissecting language.
Yeah, a set of finely tuned instruments
Yeah.
for seeing through those rhetorical tricks
Yeah.
and constructing our own arguments with clarity.
And that's helpful for everyone.
It is. It's not just for philosophers.
Right.
It's for anyone who wants to think critically.
Yeah.
Whether you're reading a text or analyzing an argument or even just having a conversation.
And it's amazing how these ideas, even though they're from the Middle Ages,
Yeah.
are still relevant today.
Absolutely. It's a testament to their brilliance.
Well, I'm definitely inspired to learn more about this.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Yeah.
There's so much more to explore.
I feel like we've just scratched the surface.
There's a whole universe of ideas out there.
Right.
Different schools of thought,
Yeah.
debates about signification, supposition.
Right. It's incredible how much they were thinking about all this.
It's really fascinating stuff.
This deep dive has been fantastic, really eye-opening.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I feel like I have a whole new set of lenses to view language with now.
That's wonderful. And who knows, maybe you'll discover something even those medieval minds missed.
That's a challenge I'm willing to take on. Thanks for taking us on this journey.
It's been my pleasure. Until next time.